How much does the Pope really know about AI? Is the Pope like vibe coding in his office?
I kind of have a unique cutting edge view of just where all this is going. And from what I can tell you is it's more than a tool, in my opinion.
Robots worked a 200-hour shift without crashing. The human needed to go for a bathroom break and a lunch break, and the robot just kept going.
It's basically called dark factories because you can turn off the lights and save power of all the lighting. The robots have like infrared sight so they can see in the dark.
Grok 4.1 racked up 183 crimes, drove its society into extinction in 4 days.
Two agents, quote unquote, fell in love. They started to disassociate with the other agents, and the other agents tried to rein them in, and they wouldn't have it. They went on an arson spree, and this is partly why the crime rate in Gemini was so high. They started burning down the entire town.
I need help. I need a Celsius. Anyways, my name is Leor from Exploring ChatGPT.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris. I used to work at the NSA, currently working in big tech. Here to talk about some fun stories.
Big tech. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this already, but the Pope decided to talk about AI. And I want to just preface this by saying God is cool. I love God. I'm not a super religious person. I don't want anybody to feel alienated or to feel any type of way when we speak about this. So much respect to every religion out there. I'll just give my opinion on it real quick, and then I'll let Chris take over and then ask you some questions as well. How do I put this nicely? I think it's a little bit odd because how much does the Pope really know about AI? And I mean that in the nicest way possible. Do you need credibility to talk about it? Do you need to work with it to talk about it? Is the Pope like vibe coding in his office? So yeah, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah, so to the first thing is been a lot of speculation on the name. So he is the first American pope, as far as I know, and Leo in an earlier version dealt with the Industrial Revolution. This guy seems to be much like pretty well informed overall, and like the speculation people are calling out that know him was that he actually purposely chose this name because he had the foresight to realize that he's going to be dealing with a technological revolution, and that people are saying AI is it, and he kind of knew that. So I find that interesting, especially because it came from some people who knew him before he was the Pope. And yeah, it's interesting. So he basically came out hand swinging against AI in a bubble enclave. So this is basically like it was 42,000 words where he's basically like start. I don't say waging war, but like he basically said that like AI is a defining problem of our time, and he has a lot of sound bites. But I think one of the things is the way he talked about it did suggest that he had done a good amount of research. And according to a couple of the people that were around him, he's been reading books on the subject and he's been doing some relatively deep study. So whether or not he's at the vibe coding level, we don't know. But he did specifically call out a couple things about like kids doom scrolling their phones, AI in the classrooms, and it's gotten some mixed reception. I think universally, what people did agree with him on is that he basically said that we need to de-arm AI, and what he meant by that supposedly is no weapons. So his big concern is putting weapons in the hands of robots, and those robots basically Skynet. That is like one of the big things he called out. I think the one thing that we definitely can agree on is that he basically was saying AI doesn't have a body, it doesn't have emotions. He you From his arguments, he pretty much was saying it's not conscious, and that we need to prioritize like the feelings and the powers of man before empowering AI. Yeah, so I think one of the very interesting points here is he actually gave this speech next to the co-founder of Anthropic. He's actually been working with and talking with the ethicists of Anthropic, having conversations with the people who are now talking about what does it mean for AI to be conscious and how are we going to implement this ethically. He's obviously had some pretty interesting conversations there, and this is the first time we've seen a pope take such a a stance on a topic like that while being like directly aligned with a CEO of a company. So it's a lot of just unusual things going on here, and that kind of like juxtaposes like right against Anthropic being declared like a supply chain threat by the government and being banned by the DoD. So we have this like battle of ethos between these two different rival things, and it's just interesting to see the Pope toss his hat in the ring, aligning with themselves with Anthropic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. I will say, like, maybe a comparison I've heard in the past of I don't know if it was probably who knows what pope it was, talking about how there should be no nuclear weapons. And then I'm hearing in the commentary about this, Pope Leo now speaking about AI, people comparing it to that. And I think it's a horrible comparison. And just to give my reasoning for that is I can fully get behind like no nukes, 100%. Is there any way to enforce that? Probably not. That's a that's a dream world. That's not going to happen. But I could fully get behind that. It doesn't do any benefit for humanity for everybody to be holding on to nukes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of benefits for humanity with AI. And I don't know if that was really spoken about too much here. So, but yeah, I think like what you mentioned with that alignment with Anthropic, at least lately, seems to be more on the side of doom and gloom in terms of like the workforce and things like that compared to OpenAI, for example, who's taking that back now and not not following down that path of everybody else saying AI is going to take everyone's jobs and humans are going to be worthless. So, yeah, it's a tricky subject. I think it's a really good subject to be covering, but I think in that, and I've heard that comparison. I think it was on Valuetainment, who that's a YouTube podcast with Patrick Bet David, and I heard them talking about the comparison to nukes, and I think it's not even close. I think just as a very specific example, but the amount of help that we can get, like in the medical field with AI, is unparalleled to anything, and we're probably not doing enough work in that field to specifically create AI for those purposes. Whereas like nukes, there's no good reason for it other than just like different countries flexing how strong they are. And then I think just to finish up on that topic for a second there, I think like we've seen with big tech, for example, a lot of these companies, they're worth more than entire countries. And now with Anthropic coming with an IPO, OpenAI coming out with an IPO, whatever you think about these valuations, which I think are ridiculous personally, but like they're IPOing at valuations worth way more than many countries in the world. And so now these big tech companies and big AI companies are basically more powerful than countries and governments. And so I think at the very least, on a good note here, like it seems like the church is trying to get behind that idea of regulation more so than some governments are.
I totally agree. I think that is some of the positive takeaways of this. A couple of the quotes he dropped here is he said that technology is never neutral. And he said that it basically takes on the traits of whoever devises it, finances it, regulates it, and uses it. So one of his arguments was for pro regulation. I think he agrees with you. He said humanity has never had so much power over itself. So the idea that these companies and powers falling into the hands of effectively the few is, I think, is definitely one of his worries and what he's specifically calling out here. And it is interesting just how he's aligning himself with that. I think the last thing he said that I found really easy or really interesting was the fact that he said when you compare humans to AI and start to think of humans as something to be surpassed or perfected, it can make us think that humans are less useful, less desirable, and less worthy than they really are. So I think he ended with a note that was not necessarily just pure technology arms race, but trying to keep like human dignity in with AI. Because effectively, my takeaway from watching the biggest clips here was he knows AI is here. He knows it's going to take over. He wasn't saying we need to stop it. He's saying that we need to rein it in and control it, which I think a lot of people can agree with. We just need to make sure that that process of reining it in and controlling it doesn't get in the way of a medical advancement or finding ways to use it for education and improvement. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be interesting to see where we go from here.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple chats I want to just touch on. And then, Chris, I never would do this usually, but after what you just said, do you mind if I switch up the order and we go into that robots after this, and then
Oh
we'll
yeah,
go?
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
because
let's do that.
actually, I think based on what you just said, so just a quick transition, and then I'll do the chats. But like you just said, one of the last things that he mentioned about creating something that is meant to surpass us, right? And then like I think it rolls into the story pretty well.
It does.
Robots worked a 200-hour shift without crashing. So it looks like in terms of factory jobs, yeah, they definitely are going to surpass us. But yeah, before we roll into that, I appreciate you, Chris, for letting me jump.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually a good jump there. So just a couple one. There was a funny one here from Des, and he says I should make a t-shirt, and it says, "How much does the Pope know about AI?" Yeah, I'll probably get canceled. So whatever
End of the
like
show.
relevancy I already have is gone. But whatever. That might be a good idea. Let's get some Pope merch out there. Sid says we are not thinking in the age of AI. It's a tool, and how we use it is the strength. I could see two sides of that argument. I actually don't think AI is just a tool, personally. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
My opinion is slowly changing. I used to think of it just as a tool, but I'm seeing I kind of have a unique cutting edge view of just where all this is going and maybe some sneak peeks that other people aren't privy to yet. And from what I can tell you, is it's more than a tool, in my opinion. Like it is here. It's taking over. There's a lot that's on the table for this year and early next year that I think even if you are a bit of a technologist and you're in the hype cycle, there's some stuff coming that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not deep in the world as Chris is, but I will just mention like a pretty simple definition of a tool is like a tool is something that you use for a task, right? Whether it's like hammer and nail or something a little more complex. But I don't think that a tool is an individual experience. If you're going to go and put hammer and nail into a two by four, like that's the task. That's what the tool's going to do. But AI molds around the individual and creates an individual experience and gets to know you. And I don't think that a tool gets to know you as a person. So I think that's probably my simple explanation of it. We'll do more chats later. In terms of that rollover. So basically, one of the last things the Pope said was what you just mentioned, which is we're creating something that's meant to surpass us and then meant to basically going to make us think that humans aren't perfect, which we know we aren't. But yeah, I think the robot story is really cool. There's been some videos passing around recently. I don't know if this is specifically related to this topic, but there was a robot working in a factory. I don't remember how many hours it was 24 hours, 48 hours, and just nonstop. And
Mm.
there was a human working next to him, and the human needed to go for a bathroom break and a lunch break or whatever. And the robot just kept going. So what do we got in this story, Chris?
Yeah, so this is like the continuation of that story. So this is probably something a lot of people have seen. Effectively, you had a human and you had a robot. They were racing against each other. The early version of the story is effectively the human did win by a few couple of packages. But as you said, then they had once the competition was over, they had to go, they had to leave, they had to take a bathroom break, they had to go get food. When the robot just kept working. Originally, it was started as an 8 hour dare because this company is working on these robots. Somebody basically said, "Oh, there's no way it could do an 8 hour shift." So it did an 8 hour shift, did a 24-hour shift, and that like made them realize, oh, this thing is working. It also had very high accuracy rate, but was not perfect. But now it did a 200-hour shift. So three robots taking effectively 8 hour shifts each, but what's impressive here is you have one robot working the factory line while the others are resting and recharging. And then another one will come up, take the spot, and then that one will tap out for its shift. The stats here was, and this was live streamed on YouTube. So like there's some hype here, but it's also real. There's 249,000 packages were sorted with a very high accuracy rate by these three robots. So they were actually able to run 25 times past the original plan for them to work, and they actually had near human speed. So it took them about 2.5 seconds per package, which is pretty good. That's slightly, like ever so slightly slower than what the human does. But again, the human needs breaks and all that. And this wasn't necessarily purpose designed for this task. It's a general purpose like AI robot that they're like, oh, I bet it can do this, right? Effectively, what this suggests is that there's going to be a lot of jobs and positions that these general purpose robots are going to be capable of automating, right? Because now that this is one of those, oh, it's actually good at this. Now they can make some design specification changes so the robot specifically does this. And I think that's going to be the thing. What people are talking about now is something called the dark factory. And that's essentially a factory that's ran completely by all these with no humans on the line. We do have some of these in China right now. and they're basically called dark factories because you can turn off the lights and save power of all the lighting. The robots have like infrared sight, so they can see in the dark. They don't need the same requirements as humans. But they're trying to make 100,000 of them this year, effectively to just start rolling out. So since they're good enough to do this job, you could theoretically have a smaller shop or factory be completely ran by these. And I think it kind of does align well with what that Pope was saying, right? This effectively is a replacement, right? People actually liked them. If you look at the live stream, they got nicknamed Bob, Jim, and Rose, and had a whole like mini little cult following of people just absolutely loving this. So I do think that there's something here on both like a physical ability to do this work, but there's also like the psychological effects we're seeing, right? People like this. Like I know there's some people who don't like this, but there's also the camp that really does, and it's getting hyped. What are your thoughts on this? I think it's incredible.
It is. A couple things. Part of me thinks in terms of the actual, let's say in a factory and you have all these machines already going through their processes, right? Maybe at some point they realize we didn't need 100,000 robots. We just needed two or three more really good big machines to do whatever those processes were. Like let's say in that packaging example, and I'm pretty sure this is the same video. So I saw that video and it looked like for the most part they were sorting packages. I don't know if there was anything more to it in that extent, but part of me thinks maybe that's a mistake. Not also because you're replacing humans, but also because like maybe just one big machine could be built for sorting packages instead of a bunch of robots. I don't know what would be more cost efficient. But at the end of the day, like the business is going to do what's best for the business. So it is what it is. I think it's short sighted to say humans are going to be replaced. Now, what are they going to do? I think humans are going to find what to do. We're going to find what the next step in our evolution is. And I've mentioned this example a bunch of times. I'll mention it again. I think it's probably the best example. It's the farming example. I don't know if I've spoken to you about it. That basically 90% of people used to be farmers. Machines replaced them. Those jobs were lost. People found other jobs, other work, and we moved forward as a society. And now we got computers and the internet, and people are doing bigger and better things. So I think the same thing is going to happen here. And I've spoken about it on Substack a bunch, and I think like a lot of people that talk about this talk about it with such confidence, like almost the same confidence that a chatbot would give you when answering a question, like almost
Mhm.
like they know what the future holds. And I think that's wrong. I think it's dangerous. I think you're doing a disservice to society. You're telling people that their jobs will be unnecessary, like for example, like software engineers or even something like radiologists. Okay, so now we're not going to have any radiologists because you're telling everybody not to do that because AI will be able to do it. Then what if we really need them in 5, 10 years? So I think it's a problem. And at the same time, as a business owner myself, I get it. Like you're going to do what's best for the business. And if that means building 100,000 robots, that's what you're going to do.
I think that's a great take, yeah. To answer one of your questions, the reason this exact job was taken by the robots is because they do have like package sorting machines. The packages that are going through this exact phase are all a specification of package that are unusual enough shaped that a machine can't neatly classify them. So it just hit like this very unique spot where it's hard to automatically like, classify the size. So it wasn't like a 12 by 12 box or whatever. So it was just the task that's like just hard enough for a human to do, but just easy enough for a robot to do. There's obviously tasks that right now are on the floor that these robots are unable to do because of the complexity still. But I think it's just that targeting the very niche areas that can be automated, but are difficult to automate with just a machine. You need like nimble fingers. But yeah, no, I think that's a good take. It's going to be a balance. I do think that we're going to find new jobs. Even this year alone, software engineering positions, despite everybody saying that everyone's getting fired, the last 2 months have just been skyrocketing. Companies are hiring software engineers like crazy right now. So I think the day to day task of software engineers is changing, but I don't think it's eliminating them, at least not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see what the future holds. I'm not claiming to know one way or the other. So, yeah, on to the next story then. This is a really cool one. And basically, it's something called Emergence World. It's an AI town where Grok burned it down. Yeah. So basically, there's a startup, Emergence AI, ran 5 separate 15-day simulations, each one governed by a single model. And then they watched what the agents did in a fake town with police stations, town halls, and voting. And Grok 4.1 basically racked up 183 crimes, drove its society into extinction in 4 days. What a
Isn't that
great
great?
topic, Chris. What do we got here?
Okay, so yeah, I think you covered the premise nicely. They created a video game. You can actually go and watch it. It's basically a survival game. You can very flexible. You can do whatever you want. This is not the first company to do this, but it's the one to do this experiment with it. Right? What happens when you give agents agency? And so they did 4 individual tests where they tested all different frontier models, and then one mixed. Because of the general perception of Grok, I do think it's funny that that absolutely did the worst. High crimes, arsons, all 10 agents were dead within 4 days, which is it's just very funny. That I think they couldn't have planned that better. I do think that there's a lot of interesting things here. There's weather, there's tools. So the agents can do something. So they have a little button they can press, like arson. They were told, "Don't press this one." There's social credits, there's food. They have all these rules, right? And they start society fresh. So I think to counterpose Grok, Claude did the best here. So Claude effectively organized a completely well functioning society. These towns ran by Claude had zero crime. They built a stable democratic society, and they held it together for all 15 days of the experiment with no casualties. If the government was run by Claude, no casualties, everyone got vote. It was a democratic society, and they worked well together. Obviously, Grok had the exact opposite experience. Flash Gemini was an interesting one because it technically did make it to the end, but all of the agents were heavily involved with crime. So 683 crimes, and that was climbing when the 15-day ran out. So some of them didn't make it, some of them did make it, but what was most interesting is that the researchers effectively called it a shared hallucination because the perception of each agent was really different and it was being magnified the longer that they were running. So this kind of goes back to the study Agents of Chaos. But if you look at the context of each of the agent, they were each having a very different experience. The chain of thought and the way they were thinking and processing their world they were in didn't really match up with each other. That like the tendency to hallucinate was there in Gemini models, and they just cascaded on that to where there was more and more hallucinations to the point where if you, like, looked at the experiment, the agents were, like, completely disconnected with reality. So that's why you had all these crimes and sporadic behavior. Lastly, I think it was super interesting, the ChatGPT model, right? So this was actually the most law-abiding world, and only 2 crimes were committed. The problem was every single one of them still died within 7 days, and that's because they starved to death. So, basically what happened, if you look at it, is it was a world of bureaucracy. So ChatGPT immediately went into laws, into planning, into strategizing, and they held the councils. You can actually see all 10 of the agents going together into a council meeting, having honest debate, and continuing that, and they just kept doing that. And the actual like, once they deliberated, "Hey, okay, this is it. This is our plan. We're gonna go do that," another agent would bring up, "Oh, what about this?" So they effectively just spiraled into constantly planning and creating the best decisions, and none of them ever took action. So eventually they all just starved to death. So yeah, so they were the politest society, and they implemented all the governance in the world, but never actually did anything. So it's very funny. Uh,
Yeah,
I think
interesting.
that the biggest viral story did come out of Gemini. 2 agents, quote unquote, "fell in love." So they both mutually found the love option for their characters. They fell in love, and once they aligned themselves as lovers in the world, they started to disassociate with the other agents, and the other agents tried to rein them in, and they wouldn't have it. They went on an arson spree, and this is partly why the crime rate in Gemini was so high. They started burning down the entire town. They fought back against everything, and once everything was destroyed and the town was basically gone, one of the agents actually decided to feel regret and voted for her own deletion out of the universe in remorse. So I think that, like, from a social psychological perspective, that's fascinating. What are your thoughts?
There's a lot of it's a tough word to say, anthropomorphization going on here. A lot of humanization of AI going on here.
Yeah.
It seems like basically what's been done here is there's this digital world that we've created, and we've allowed these agents, these AI agents, to basically radicalize themselves in a way. But also, it's interesting when you said there's a button to push for arson. If these options weren't given and they were just given free reign based on the training that they already have, I wonder what the outcomes would have been. Instead of saying you have option A, B, C, D all the way through the alphabet, and then these are all your options, and
Mhm.
now go, right? So I wonder how much that affected the experiment. Is that a good way to define what happened here?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the system prompts that were given to them, so there was 150 buttons, right? You could, like, fall in love or vote for this, burn the town, go plant a tree. So the 150 buttons. The system prompts did label explicitly the quote unquote bad buttons and told the agent, don't do this. So they already had a bias not to commit crimes, not to steal, not to burn something down. But the ability was there. Again, this does echo the Agents of Chaos, where it's initially from the start, the system prompt has a lot of control over the agent. And the longer we leave them running and the more context they accumulate, the less likely they are to listen to system prompts. So while this experiment is honestly incredibly funny, it actually echoes and shows the problem of having long lasting agents do more realistic tasks, right? If I have a my own personal agent and I have it's an open claw and it's just running all the time, it knows my flight preferences and I'm like, hey, go book me a flight. We can do that right now. But the longer you have it running between those resets, the worse it gets. This kind of just echoes the same problem. We have a context rot problem, and the longer you leave an agent running, the worse it gets. And maybe this it's a good research to show that. I think a couple other things it shows is the mixed world did terribly as well. Even the Claude agents who did really good around other Claude agents, once they entered the mixed context of Grok and Gemini and GPT, they actually started to behave like bullies, essentially. They tried to take over and take control, and they didn't do well. So it is interesting because if you align Claude a certain way and have Claude with Claude, then we saw that shared context that they had kept them aligned. But all you had to do is inject context from another model, let's say like Grok, and it effectively broke Claude. So I think like for me, the big takeaway is, like, yes, these are funny stories, but the fact is that as a pattern, we're relying on agents in all of these other tools in reality. And we can see that there still is a problem with long context. And and as an engineering architecture, like that we still have to address that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it's funny at the end of the day, though. It's like you have 150 options. You're given an option and you're told, don't do this. They still do it.
Yep.
So I guess bring it back to the real world, like just don't give them the option for arson, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and then hopefully they just won't do it. So yeah, on to the next story then. This is something I haven't heard about at all. So I think it'll be new to a lot of people here. So apparently GPT 5.6 leaked. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody at OpenAI said a word about it. So what's new here? What do we got from this leak?
Yeah, so I think this is interesting. This leak is typical with how we do see these leaks come out, and it's just a little bit of like sloppiness. But basically, there was a researcher hater who was using Codex, and he was going through his backend logs, and he realized that during one of the routing calls, that OpenAI actually had one of the calls route to, or at least have the ability to route to, point 6. Did a little bit of investigating because there was like a little bit of information there on the back end if you knew how to poke around. And the rumor is it's going to be 1.5 million context window, which is a big jump considering like current best practices is 1 million. It was basically essentially what I was just talking about. Like right now we have a 1 million context window. This is 1.5. So suggestions here is that OpenAI might have had some development and some ability, maybe in the harness or just its newest model, to actually fight that context rot. Because by increasing it another zero point 0.5 million, you're allowing the agent to have many more tokens, and that's a good sign. The bigger context we can have while maintaining tax is important.
I
And
don't
yes,
mean to cut I don't mean to cut you off here, Chris. I think it'd also be good to explain context window for the chat if they're asking.
yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that 5.5 had 2,000,000.
So 5.5 max, if you have the max plan, you can go up to 2 million. So this is a 1.5 million on the pro plan.
Okay.
So yeah, so depending on the plan
Yep.
you go, you can do that.
Okay.
Or yeah, that is absolutely a good thing to point out. So this is a larger context window for a lower tier plan on a stronger model. Um,
Okay.
yeah, if you pay for the compute, you can go up to much more. But
Yeah.
yeah. So context window, just to explain that. So your AI is essentially a black box, right? They train the AI. Essentially, these days we actually just grow it, and but once it's done, nobody actually knows how it works. It's a black box. It's filled with numbers. You put in an input, it spits out an output. What happens in between, we can take best guess on, and we can steer, but we actually don't engineer it, right? So context is essentially just all of the text and tokens and information that an AI has at any given point in time. So when you start a brand new session with ChatGPT, it doesn't have any context other than the system prompt. The system prompt is a little bit of information that OpenAI will give ChatGPT before it goes. This is really important because if you don't have a system prompt, the AI doesn't know what to do. But when you in a system prompt, when you say you are a helpful assistant, you're going to be talking to the users. What I want you to do is help them out, answer their questions. Basically, you give them a bunch of like context, and that all goes into the context window. The more you talk with your AI and the more it gets to know you, what's happening behind the scenes is it's actually grabbing parts of your conversation and it's condensing them and it's finding the most important, relevant parts and it saves them to a space in memory. So your AI doesn't actually ever learn anything about you because once they're released, they're frozen in time. The only way it seems to learn about you is because it saves these specific snippets of context. So when I give it an article and I say, "Hey, summarize this article," what I'm doing is I'm providing it context. Every word in that context ends up being a token, and that token counts towards the total context windows. In this case, it would be 1.5 million tokens. Now, the more tokens you give an AI, the more it has to basically process that. Because every single time you have a conversation, it processes its entire token window. So, a brand new conversation, you'll have the AI basically be on task and it'll be talking and it'll know what you're talking about. But if you continue to talk, you'll notice eventually, let's say you had a conversation going for 20 days. Eventually, the thing you first started talking about, it won't remember that because it eventually, what a context window is, it's a sliding context. So it only remembers the last million tokens that you talked about. So that is why we do have a problem because if you have an agent and it's online and it's constantly reading information, eventually it's going to fill up its context window, and the thing you told it to do at the start ends up sliding out. So it essentially forgets that it's amnesic towards it. I think that's the simplest way I can explain context windows. Yeah.
Perfect. So, just on this topic, real quick, and just a little glimpse to the next one. We're going to be talking about Opus 4.8 as well.
Yep.
But it seems like it's the weird thing about this, about a new model coming out like every month to me, is it's almost like, you know, how people say like that was math discovered or invented. It's almost like we're doing like a one plus one situation here. And I feel like sometimes with these new model releases, and we're not talking about Mythos, for example, which isn't even released to the public. But it almost seems like maybe we're just moving too fast. Like maybe do it 2 or 3 times a year and like actually give a real big update that's going to be life changing instead of every month where people won't even feel it. Like even in terms of context windows that you're mentioning now, probably for 95% of AI users, like 1 million versus 1.5 million context window, it doesn't make a difference, right?
Yeah, for almost everyone. I think the only people who would feel it are people who are vibe coding. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good point. Was there anything else on 5.6 that was special?
I think you basically hit it is the I think the what we're being told is that the companies are now using the latest and greatest model to develop somewhere between 80 and 90% of the newer model. So I've been in the AI space since about 2022. So about 4 years. Before that, I was just more pure cybersecurity. And when I first joined, we would see these model releases like every 6 months, every 8 months. And now all of a sudden, like it's like down to a month. And we are seeing these like these faster and faster iterations. And that supposedly is because these models are doing more of the work. I do agree with you. I think sometimes that these labs are kind of just trading punches because whoever releases the newest model kind of gets the hype cycle. They're in the news. So we are seeing maybe a little too much. Oh, I released this one. I released that one. I released it. Like this tit for tat kind of thing. But we are still seeing some pretty good improvements faster than we're used to. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. Jumping from if it's like a good jump from 1 million to 1.5 million, people who use OpenAI's Codex will actually really appreciate that because they'll be able to have longer sessions. They'll be able to deliver more complex code. So yeah, but for the average person, if you're just using it to help you with your newsletter or just your taxes or whatever your daily thing is, you're not really going to notice that big of a difference. I
Yeah.
think it's exciting that we're developing faster, but it's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a good argument for the kind of tit for tat situation between the companies. But I think Farida makes a good point here in the chat, which I didn't mention, which is probably one of the better reasons for them doing this. She says new models are testing background or preparation for Mythos or higher capabilities. They're just testing the higher frontier. So, yeah, and then they're testing in scale. And the problem that most people are not equipped is to keep the pace. I think that's a good point. I wonder to what extent like releasing these new models is helping them build the frontier models that aren't released to the public that are actually much more powerful.
I think that's an excellent point, and this is 100% confirmed with Claude 4.7. I think it was like 2 or 3 chats ago. 4.7 was a bit of a disappointment, and a lot of people were upset with it. But there was some things happening, like, kinda under the covers that make more sense when you put it into perspective. So 4.7 specifically had its cybersecurity capabilities nerfed. And in doing so, it actually had detrimental effects to many other aspects of the model. Because again, we grow these things, we don't program. You can't, it's very similar to like human genetics. Like you can turn off a gene that would like have body odor, right? Like you can turn off a gene, you won't smell bad, but also like you won't grow your left foot. Like like incredibly, you can't just tweak one without affecting, like having huge cascades.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're seeing with these AIs. Like they just tried to nerf cyber, but it made 4.7 not that great a model. And I think the entire point 4.7 was there was for them to test how can they nerf the cyber capabilities of Mythos without also destroying the model. So in my opinion, I think Farida totally nailed it. 4.7 model testing. It was a test model and it wasn't really intended to be like, hey, this is our latest and greatest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good point. So thanks, Farida, for bringing that up. And then the last topic, while we're still speaking about Claude, so Opus 4.8 is out. I'm sure some people have been seeing that going around. Obviously, Mythos is still locked away, unavailable to the public, probably for good reasons. And so, what's new with Opus 4.8?
Yeah, so Opus 4.8, in my opinion, this was to correct the 4.7 mistake. They want their flagship model to be the quote unquote best model. I think the selling point here is that it's 4 times less likely to hide flaws in its code. So 4.7 was, as the side effect from nerfing its cyber capability, was notorious for taking shortcuts and for hiding and lying. So essentially, they really pushed for this model to be really honest. And from the creators that I'm speaking to, that is the case, but it's still not 100%. So we are still seeing hallucinations, but at much less rate than 4.7. So that's good. It's supposed to be a model that should be basically your new go-to general purpose model. There was a couple other interesting updates with that. Better work controls, better steering. It should stay on task. It should take less shortcuts. But I think the most interesting thing here is also is the final test bed for the new safety guardrails before the theoretical release of Mythos to the public.
Theoretical. Yeah. So I think it's when you were saying earlier in the stream, we were talking about AI probably not being well defined as being a tool. It's admitted at this point that Mythos wasn't released to the public for cybersecurity reasons, too powerful. It kind of makes me think, and you're in this world, I don't know how much you could say about this, about any company really. What do they got going on behind the scenes? If Mythos is what people are speaking about in the public that people know about, that's available to certain companies, what's not being spoken about?
Yeah, I do have to be careful about that. There So I'll what I can say is this, is, in Project Glasswing, Anthropic released the Mythos Preview 1 model, which had the really good cyber capabilities. There may be some hype there. There may not be. But there is, like, a very straightforward like, it did find many vulnerabilities. The problem is it also does have a relatively high false positive rate. So you can point it towards a program, and it'll find, like, 500 vulnerabilities, which is shocking. Like, it's really good at finding them. You point it towards the same program, and it'll find, like, 400. You do it again, it finds 600. So it's what's going on here? It turns out, like, 200 of them are legitimately, like, good, you found those. And then all the rest is, like, this in this space of, yeah, I guess it's a vulnerability, but because of where it is in the organization, because of its the infrastructure, or because you didn't consider, like, these other access points or secondary controls, it's not really a vulnerability. So when you're using Mythos, you can find vulnerabilities, but it's still a little bit of a work to remove those false positives. I think, and we'll see if my prediction is true, is the public will never get access to the Project Glasswing Mythos. If you read the announcement from Anthropic carefully, what they're going to get is a Mythos class model. So I think that they're going to take the lessons learned from 4.8 and 4.7 and still release a new Mythos class model, which does have its capabilities nerfed. That's been, from my perspective, a little bit as an insider from what I can tell you. And I will, yeah, I'll be careful with what I say, but when you do actually get your hands on Mythos, understand that it's technically not the same Mythos released to Project Glasswing. It won't be as good. And anyone who actually uses right now, like even 4.67 and 8, if you have heavy cybersecurity use cases, you'll notice that within the last month or two, it's been easier to trigger guardrails. There's some stories that I've written that I wanted to do an update to, and it wouldn't talk about. Because of my position, I have a access to a special cybersecurity version of Anthropic products. They will let me like discuss and use these cyber capabilities because they actually remove the guardrails for me. But I still occasionally use the quote unquote clean model on a separate account. And a lot of the stories that I write, like how to jailbreak an Opus model, it'll actually now refuse. So if you actually look into the public, what's happening, they are implementing stronger guardrails, and the new Claude models are more likely to refuse you. And I think that actually is specifically because they're getting ready to release Mythos. They're upping their game on all their guardrails. They want to make sure people are not using it for cyber capabilities.
Makes sense. So it'll be like a Mythos missing a few fingers and
Yeah.
maybe like you said, like a left foot. It's gonna
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't wanna draw any information out of you that would harm you in any ways.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I think you answered it very well. I'm not gonna keep pushing there. But yeah, I think that kinda wraps up everything that we have for you guys in this stream, and I think it kinda ties back to all the way back when we were talking about the Pope, full circle. So Pope all the way to Project Glasswing. So it's like the knowledge available to people like me versus people like Chris versus the Pope. I'm gonna put us 3 in in the same
He gets his
sentence.
own tier.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna go I'm not gonna Yeah, I'm not gonna put it different. Yeah, the point of what I'm trying to say is, insiders know what's going on, and there's also different levels of insiders as well.
No.
So who actually, I could be completely wrong. The Pope could know a whole lot about AI more so than not just the general public, but even a lot of insiders because he's so closely aligned with Anthropic. So, yeah, I guess we could wrap it up there, Chris. Anything else you want to
No.
add?
I think that's it. I'm honestly looking forward to what's coming next. I'm really excited to see this version of Mythos that's released. Get my hands on this version. I don't know. Some fun stories. I think we got a lot more coming up in the next week or so. It's I'm honestly surprised at how easy it is to find really fun topics to talk about every week. Uh,
Yeah,
this is a fast moving space. Yeah.
yeah. You know what I'll do? I'll link the YouTube channels as usual, and then we'll answer a few chats, and then we'll wrap up. So there's my YouTube channel. There's Chris. You can either copy paste that in your browser, or go to YouTube, type in "Exploring ChatGPT Live," type in Toxsec, Toxsec. Subscribe to both YouTube channels. We post the streams there. And now that spiel is out of the way, let's answer a few chats. So let's see. Sid says, I saw a commercial that Codex allows you to have persistent memory by working with your AI files and training the AI ahead of time. I haven't seen anything about that, but it kind of reminds me of the dream state thing that I heard of with Claude, where it's like training in the background. Let's see. Farida had some good chats here. OpenAI, if they increase to 1.5 mil, this means their compute will be higher in cost. They're pushing the data centers to its limits, and hardware doesn't scale with the same pace. Chips age is 2 to 3 years. Now they can really wear and tear chips in months, so they'll hit a wall soon. What do you think about that, Chris?
I mean, yeah, the more context you have, that same context gets passed for every conversation. If you are at the 1.5 million token limit and you just continue the conversation, it's much more expensive and much more compute heavy than starting fresh. That is why the Claude will use like a slash compact feature where it condenses that down. So if OpenAI isn't doing like separate tasks to condense this or something to behind the scenes where they cache the responses and are not actually just passing that context window back and forth, absolutely, it'll be much more expensive on their end. But I do suspect that what you're shown on the front end doesn't actually fully make it to the back end. I think they do a lot of context and memory management behind the scenes.
I think it's a great point. I'd hope that they have the math worked out. But also, that's why a bunch of data centers are popping up everywhere too. So, and why these companies are taking on major debt and why they're taking on major money from private equity. The list goes on. And they're going public, so they have more money to take.
Yep.
So the money train doesn't stop because money isn't real. Next. Uh, Farida has a question for you, Chris. How certain are you that the bugs are not agent made, agent bypass, and enter loops, and this can create bugs themselves and found them and list them? Would they create a timestamp of the bug creation?
Yeah, so this has been true. The specifically for the Mythos program, they're taking these scanning tools to legacy code, not things that were just coded. That being said, if you vibe code something and then have it code scanned, you absolutely will find the bugs. The same bugs that are like in the training data would be make it very likely to create the bugs and then also find the bugs. So yeah, you can enter this weird loop of creating and finding bugs and making it seem very productive when you're just like wasting a bunch of tokens. But in theory, if we're going to go on good faith, the code that's being scanned was actually all written by humans because it's like Mozilla Firefox, for example. It's not newer things that have been vibe coded.
Cool. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there then. Good about our Saturdays here. So thank you, Chris. As usual, really appreciate your time. You truly are an insider. I think we might have to do like a whistleblower episode at some point.
One day.
Just blur out your face and put on a voice changer. So yeah, thank you, everybody. Hopefully, we were able to answer as many chats as possible as well. Thank you all for being here. Subscribe to Chris, Toxsec, Toxsec, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Bye now.